Welcome to Week 8 of the President's Athletic Conference Football Focus. I'm Waynesburg University senior Carson Fox, and this week our focus turns to the Waynesburg University Yellow Jackets, who after earning the title of PAC co-champions in 2012 and being in the thick of the hunt for the PAC conference title the last two seasons, are rebuilding at 2-5. Each week, the PAC Football Focus features one team from around the conference. We'll look into the program, recap the previous week, and preview Saturday's matchups to get you ready for the upcoming weekend. Make sure to stay tuned. Following the Football Focus, Andy Stanko and Sean Saputo are back for another edition of the PAC Pregame Show. We'll take a look back at Week 7 and bring you the storylines for Week 8, which features a matchup between two title contenders hosted in Cleveland, Ohio. In his 11th season at the helm of the program, Waynesburg University head coach Rick Shepis has built the Yellow Jacket program into an annual conference championship contender. In 2012, Shepis led the Orange and Black to a 10-1 season, finishing the season as a PAC co-champions with Washington and Jefferson, and defeated then University Athletic Association member Carnegie Mellon University in an ECAC Southwest Bowl game. The last two seasons, it was W&J, Thomas More, and Waynesburg fighting for the conference crown. This season, Shepis passed Frank Wolf for the all-time head coaching wins leader at the program. Shepis is quick to acknowledge, though, he couldn't have done it had it not been for the players that have come through the program.
When you look at anything like that, I mean, it's obviously there are players awards because obviously players buy into the way you're coaching and they go out and they win. And if you recruit the right players, obviously, you win more games than others. So, players contribute to that stuff. So it makes you feel real good.
In the ever-revolving world of college football, the reason why Shepis has chosen to stay and be a part of the Jacket program for so long has come down to a few reasons.
It has always been and will always be, about my family. That is one of the biggest reasons why I chose to stay in one place for so long, And I wanted to make sure that my daughters, I have 3 daughters, I wanted to make sure first and foremost that they had stability and that I wouldn't be moving around. Now, when it comes to Waynesburg University, I chose a place that I felt, was attractive. And I thought, well, this is a place where I could really build something. I saw a lot of positive things in it. Along with the campus and the programs and courses, small college atmosphere for students is where it's at. And to have the opportunity, a true student athlete in a good small college campus where faculty does care about their students, obviously that was another attraction for me in regard to, selling Waynesburg University to potential quality student athletes. And I wanted to be at a place where professors were actively involved in student outcome, which ours are here.
After the graduation of the 2014 class, which was one of the winningest classes in Waynesburg football history, the Jackets are enduring a rebuilding year at 2 wins and 5 losses. Among the different reasons for the increase in losses this season, it has boiled down to youth, inexperience, and a coaching vacancy last season, according to Shepis.
You obviously want to create that expectation. We feel really good about the recruiting class that we had, this year to get back to that level. It's just a question of getting those guys that game experience and then being able to play people. I've always said, and I've learned throughout my coaching career, especially here, that at this level, at the Division III level, you definitely don't want to get young. Unfortunately, this particular year, we were affected, by some youth. This class was also affected by a coaching change. When Rich Bowen left our staff to take the head coaching job at Hempfield, we had a vacant coaching position, for 6 months during the recruiting period. And that's a big reason why our class number, was affected in the recruiting process. So, getting back on track now with a full class of players is awesome.
Among the 25 talented seniors who graduated last year was quarterback Carter Hill, who finished his career as one of the best in school history. This year, the coaching staff turned over the reins of the offense to true freshman Jake Doherty. Despite the losses in 2015, Shepis sees a lot of positives in Doherty to reach greater heights down the road.
I think Jake Doherty, has the same pedigree as a Carter Hill, and he's definitely a guy that we want to build this program around. We knew, he was going to have a great opportunity to be a solid player as a freshman starter, and that's one of the reasons why we made some significant changes in the off season to make sure that we nurtured his progress. One of the reasons why some of the statistics are a little bit skewed, is because we want to make sure that, we don't get foolish with his progression, as a football player. So we're not taking risks on 3rd and long. We want to do foolish things with the football. But I'm really happy with his progress. We've kind of stabilized here in the last 2 weeks, and our conversations as we finish the year out are just, with the opportunities we have before us. I'm really excited to see, how he progresses in these last couple weeks of the year.
With Doherty adjusting to the collegiate game, the Waynesburg offense has relied heavily on senior running back Jerry Lawmen to shoulder the load. Lawmen is currently 4th in the PAC in rushing attempts, 7th in the conference in rushing yards per game with 96, and has scored 7 rushing touchdowns. Shepis says he's liked what he's seen from the player he personally recruited 4 years ago.
Just really proud of Jerry and his durability. We had a touch count of plays that we wanted to stick to because we know in the past Jerry's been a great player, his ability to stay healthy. So fortunately for us, he has been that workhorse. He's exceeded the number of times that we even want him to touch the ball just because he's been so productive in our offense. And it really was great to see him have that breakout game, really busted some big runs against a pretty stout Westminster front, and to see the progress of our offensive line.
Leading the skill position players in the receiving game is junior Kevin Barnes Jr., who has transitioned nicely to the wide receiver position this year after bouncing around positions for the last 2 seasons, and is currently 6th in the PAC with 480 receiving yards on 34 catches with 5 touchdowns on the season. Shepis says with more experience at the position, he'll even be better.
Kevin played 1 year quarterback in high school, so he's really a wide receiver. We moved him around last year. We're starting to move him around again this year. And I think, he's had some great performances, and as he improves on his consistency, he's going to be better.
On the defensive side of the ball, leaders senior linebacker Aaron Palmer and junior defensive lineman Zach Machuga have put together solid 2015 campaigns, as Palmer is currently 5th in the PAC with 63 tackles, and Machuga is 3rd amongst defensive linemen in the conference with 42 tackles. Shepis has admired their toughness to give it their all week in and week out, despite the overall unit dipping from what they've been accustomed to at the beginning of their careers.
What they're doing everything they can, as far as we're concerned, to get us back on track, from a defensive perspective. So I would say leadership and just consistency in play for them. Although it's been extremely frustrating for them. I don't think there's any question. It's been a challenge. When you have a season like we're having right now, you got to be thick-skinned, and you have to have guys that are fighters that are going to fight through this stuff. So I'm pretty pleased that guys are responding like they are.
In the secondary, Waynesburg is currently 10th out of the 11 teams in pass defense, averaging 253 yards through the air to opposing offenses. The defense has seen a rotation of players who had little experience coming into 2015 take larger roles because of an injury to one key player that Shepis counted on as a sophomore starter in 2014 and finished as an All-PAC honorable mention.
We're always going to get better, and we're always going to improve. Nothing will ever take the place of experience. But every game opportunity is going to be the opportunity to get better, and we're showing that. I think one thing to mention, I think that's integral, is the loss of Mundell. Mundell was a much bigger loss, than we would have ever anticipated after week 1. I think that's extremely significant.
Last week, Waynesburg fell to Westminster in what was a very competitive game, tied at 7 going into halftime, before the Titans pulled away in the second half to win 24-7. Shepis points out to one series in the second quarter when the tide turned away from Waynesburg that was one of the few factors that led to what could have been a win.
I don't think there's any question. The key momentum series in the game was us in the red zone scoring a touchdown and a pass to Kevin Barnes that was called back to an illegal man downfield, and then we don't put it back in the end zone to go up 14-0. That's the game right there. There's several positive things to build upon from that game, and we'll work to do that. We just got to make the necessary changes to keep going forward.
This week, the Jackets have the Thiel Tomcats on Senior Day, as both teams are vying for a critical conference win. Waynesburg has won the last 9 contests versus Thiel, and Scheppes is 9-1 all-time against the Tomcats, with the only loss coming in 2005, the year the Tomcats won the PAC championship. Scheppes has a few keys to victory.
I just look at it as two programs that are fighting, for their program lives, and they know how valuable wins are. I think each team is going to go in to this particular game feeling like they're going to have an opportunity to win. We just want to continue to run the football well, because that obviously puts Jake in a good situation. Have a better mix of run-pass in this particular football game, and then make a big play in the kicking game that's going to put some fire on our sidelines and get us going. Whether it's a block punt, whatever.
Regarding the final 4 weeks to the season, Scheppes views them as a way to get even more young players involved to get game action, as well as capitalize on the remaining quarters of play for Waynesburg seniors, who have dedicated themselves to a conference co-championship, a huge rivalry win versus W&J last season, and many other thrilling wins during their time as Yellow Jackets.
If you can understand this too, we're in week 8 of the season, and with a bye week in there, we basically have we're under a month and counting on the culmination of a season for us. And, I think a lot of it has to do with the way, we look at things and the way we prepare our players. So, I've told our guys we've made some changes in the practice plan. We're going to continue to look for young talent, continue to play more people, because as we add to the depth of our program, it's going to only make us better. But the end of this season for us is almost an opportunity at a padded spring football, if you will. When you consider, just like I talked about earlier in the conversation, right? We're used to being in a situation where we're contending for the league championship. In 11 years, there's only been about 3 years that we were out of contention at this point in the season. This is one of maybe 3. I think it matters the way you look at it. And for us, and the way we're looking at it is, we've got an opportunity to build. We want to honor our seniors as we go into the finish of our season. But at the same time, we're preparing for a future with a great young quarterback and a good group of young players, who are hanging on the way this thing finishes. So, we still need leadership from our upperclassmen, and we got to right the ship and get it in a direction. Hopefully the way that they responded in this game this past week will be a big indicator in how that is progressing.
Thanks again to head coach Rick Scheppes and Waynesburg University for being featured as this week's PAC Football Focus. Coming up next week, we'll focus on the Westminster Titans, who are on the way up with 3 straight conference wins and host St. Vincent in a big game after a bye week. Stay with us after the break. We'll take a look at all of Week 8's game action on the PAC Pregame Show here on PACathletics.org.
I'm Joe Anderko, Commissioner of the President's Athletic Conference. Want to know what makes the PAC so special? Here's a few reasons why.
Comprised of 10 private institutions and 2 affiliate members, the PAC remains unique in this era of high-pressure college athletics. Now sponsoring 21 sports as it celebrates over 60 years of competition, the PAC is regarded as one of the elite NCAA Division III conferences in the nation. Our student athletes excel in athletics as well as the classroom, with numerous postgraduate scholarship winners, over 150 academic All-Americans, and over 900 academic honorable recipients with a 3.6 GPA or higher in the past year alone. Want to learn more? Visit us at www.pacathletics.org or follow the President's Athletic Conference on social media.
Academic and athletic excellence since 1955, the President's Athletic Conference.
And welcome back. It's another edition of the PAC Pregame Show here on PACathletics.org. Carson Fox alongside my usual cast of characters, Andy Stanko and Sean Saputo, ready to talk about Week 8 action around the President's Athletic Conference. But guys, before we get down into each individual matchup, let's break down Week 7, as it really wasn't any upsets that we were expecting, as all of the teams that were higher in the PAC standings won, but there were still some intriguing matchups, so I'll break it down to you guys. Anything that you take away from this Week 7 action?
Well, Week 7, you have the top 5 teams against teams that are in the bottom 6, with Thiel being the off team, and you really saw some teams have to go out and earn it. The game that we were at, Westminster and Waynesburg, through the first half, it was really an even game before Westminster came out and really dominated the second half, able to come away with a win. You also see Case Western struggling as much as we've seen this offense struggle since coming to the PAC in this season. They've just been plowing through teams, only a 20-7 victory over Geneva. And then really the big story for me this week, St. Vincent and Thomas More. The Bearcats really pushing the Saints. The Saints are a ranked team this season. And Thomas More, this is the first game where really there's been a question of potentially a loss. And when you look ahead in the season, Thomas More still has a couple of more tests, as do W&J, Case Western, especially coming up in this week.
And what I take out of last week's action in the President's Athletic Conference was the St. Vincent Bearcat team that really fought hard against a great Thomas More Saints squad, only losing 42-28. Tyler Donahue played a great game in terms of running the ball, but the pass game was ineffective for St. Vincent. A couple mistakes here and there cost St. Vincent that game, but I really look at that team as we are still unknowing of what this team is capable of, not only just losing to John Carroll and Case Western by pretty decent margins, but then they can come out and beat some of the other teams in the PAC. They give Thomas More this game, so St. Vincent was really a team that I looked at from this past week that I'm curious to see what this team can do the rest of the season and if it can continue to finish in that top 4 to 6 range in the President's Athletic Conference.
Yeah, St. Vincent just had to be a little bit better on 3rd and 4th down. 2 failed attempts and an interception thrown in the final quarter of regulation, as we maybe have seen in an upset like we were talking about last week against Thomas More. I also like Carnegie Mellon pulling off a dominating performance against Grove City, 44-0, with Antonio Carosha back for the Wolverines. A 7-yard per carry performance for Sam Banger, 189 yards and a touchdown. I really don't think Sam Banger's human, guys. And this defense really had a standout day, forcing 3 interceptions and holding Grove City to 9 for 21 on 3rd down and 0 for 3 in the red zone. I just really think this Tartans defense is turning a corner, even though it was against Grove City. And W&J putting up 66 points on Bethany, the second most points it's put up against an opponent since St. Vincent in 2008, when the Presidents put up 72. And 52 of their 66 points came in the first half when the first team offense was in. Big days from both Pete Coughlin and Ryan Ruffing, as the offense was nearly perfect at 8 for 9 in the red zone, as the turnover woes continue for Lincoln Reyes, despite putting up big number of games by the offense, and the defense really was humbled in this one. Any final thoughts before we put Week 7 to bed?
Let's get into it.
All right, let's break it down. Let's get into Week 8 action, starting up with I think is going to be the second best matchup of the week in the President's Athletic Conference. We'll get into what I think is going to be the best, Case Western and W&J, later in the show. But the St. Vincent Bearcats, 3-3 overall, 2-2 in PAC play, at the Carnegie Mellon Tartans, who are also 3-3 overall, 3-2 in the PAC. This is a 1 o'clock kickoff in Pittsburgh, PA. Not one of the real historic rivalries in the PAC, as these two teams have just a 1-1 series against each other. And going back to 2014, it was a 38-31 St. Vincent win at home. It was a back-and-forth game all day long before St. Vincent finally pulled away with 9 minutes to play in the fourth quarter. Andrew Herron was intercepted twice on CMU's final 2 possessions of the game, and St. Vincent came away with the 7-point victory. Guys, Tartans, Bearcats, 2 teams fighting it with Westminster in that second tier in the PAC. What do we see in this one?
Well, I want to start with CMU, and I have to give credit where credit is due. Andrew Herron is flat out getting the job done in these last few weeks. CMU's won 3 out of its last 4, and in these last 2 games, I know it's Bethany who's been giving up a lot of points. Grove City, who of course winless in the conference this season, but he's gone over 200 yards in both games. 4 touchdown passes against Bethany, 3 touchdown passes against Grove City, and then he ran one in against Grove City. That's 4 touchdowns in each week. And on top of that, you have the leading rusher in the nation. That's getting it done. And I didn't imagine coming into the season what team would be top 4 in scoring offense, top 4 in scoring defense. I would have gone through a list of teams before I would have gotten to CMU, but they put up 30.5 points per game. They put up over 400 yards per game, and of course, running the football, 250 yards a game, first in the PAC. And I really like what this offensive line has been able to do. They've allowed 14 sacks all year, second fewest in the conference, and they've been opening holes for Sam Banger all season. I love John Prather coming out and emerging as a receiving threat. 85 yards, 3 touchdowns against Bethany, 4 receptions, 71 yards last week against Grove City. And low-key, CMU has blowout wins against Geneva, Bethany, and Grove City. That's 28, 21, and 44-point victories. And they aren't hurting themselves. A +6 turnover margin, 8 giveaways, which is the second fewest mark in the PAC. And situationally, I can't complain at all. Second best in red zone defense, second best in red zone offense, scoring 86% of the time while allowing opponents to score only 60% of the time. And they've got playmakers on defense. Drew Fitzmaurice leads the PAC in passes defended and interceptions. It's just been a great year so far.
Yeah, and I want to bounce off your John Prather. You gave the last 2 weeks, but 11 receptions, 206 yards, and 4 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks for John Prather. And as you mentioned, really becoming that receiver threat that Andrew Herron has needed. But this St. Vincent team, what it does to opponents is it's a ball-hawking defense. And Carnegie Mellon and what we've seen out of Andrew Herron in the past, not much the past 2 weeks, but he has been prone to turn the ball over. So if St. Vincent can go out and get turnovers on the defensive side of the ball, I think that helps St. Vincent get closer towards a win this week, especially considering when we look at Carnegie Mellon and St. Vincent, it's been more, I guess you can say, the run game that has benefited both of these teams, and the pass game hasn't really benefited either of these teams, especially with Tyler Donahue now 7 of 18 for 54 yards, a touchdown, 3 interceptions. The touchdown was a 30-yard pass to Dalton Dietrich, the lone catch he had on the day. But for the defense, it did force the 3 turnovers I had mentioned, but only 7 points came out of those turnovers. And what really caught my eye was in the fourth quarter with 7 minutes remaining, down 35-28 against Thomas More. This team had the ball on the Thomas More 30-yard line. Now, it was a 4th and 23 at this point. However, against Thomas More, late in the fourth quarter, I would expect them to possibly go for that, try to go out and beat the number 12 team in the country at the time. Unable to do so, they decide to punt the ball there. Thomas More gets the ball back, then eventually punts the ball back to St. Vincent, gets it at the 1-yard line, interception, touchdown. Enough said there. The game's over at that point. Rennie LaRue Holloman has been the leader of this defense, and I think if St. Vincent's defense can key up on Sam Banger and force Andrew Herron to have to throw the ball more and more, I think that means for St. Vincent to win the game. But for Carnegie Mellon, on the other hand, if they can cue on Tyler Donahue and his rushing threat that he has, I think then that's a key for Carnegie Mellon to go on and win this game also.
Yeah, I think across the board, this matchup is fairly even. Both teams have forced the same amount of turnovers. Both have been stout in the red zone. I think where this game favors Carnegie Mellon is junior running back Sam Banger, yet to really prove he has any weaknesses, leading the country, 1,174 yards, 10 touchdowns. And as you guys have mentioned, Andrew Herron putting together decent performances the last 2 weeks, and he's gaining confidence to make this offense balanced. I think where the game favors St. Vincent is CMU is prone to giving up huge yardage totals. 447 yards per game on average. That's good for second worst in the PAC. And the Tartans give up more first downs to opposing offenses in the conference, which is an area St. Vincent isn't particularly good at. So I think St. Vincent just giving Thomas More a game, and Tyler Donahue looks to have won the quarterback job for now after rushing for over 100 yards for the second straight game. Just can he take advantage of all the playmakers he has on the offensive side of the ball out of the passing game this time around compared to last week? Carnegie Mellon is hot, playing at home, but this is one of those games that we talked about earlier in the season that St. Vincent would have to win to really show that this program is turning a corner and taking that next step toward being a contender. This is that type of win.
Oh, absolutely, because this past week we had top half versus bottom half. St. Vincent is a team right in the middle, 2-2. This is a chance to say, hey, don't loop us in with Geneva, Bethany, Grove City, teams that CMU has demolished. We're in that next tier, and you mentioned Tyler Donahue. Running for 200 yards against Thiel is cool. That's great. A lot of teams have done that. A lot of teams are going to do that. But going for 158 and having an 88-yard touchdown run against Thomas More, that makes me think he's legit.
I think we can put the Evan Sheminsky quarterback controversy to bed now. I think it's Donahue's offense to control.
And now, you know what else that could do? Perhaps Shavonte Kraft gets going again. 11 carries, 79 yards, and a touchdown. His best game of the season came last week against the vaunted Thomas More defense. It's a really fun matchup because St. Vincent takes the ball away. CMU takes care of the football. CMU gives up a ton of yards. St. Vincent gives away a ton of yards with penalties. And CMU gives up so many first downs. CMU gives up first downs. St. Vincent doesn't convert on third down.
Yep.
A lot of places this game can be decided. It's going to be a fun matchup.
All right, guys, well, let's move on to our next one, a 1 o'clock kickoff in Bethany, West Virginia, as the Bison 2-5 overall, 1-4 in PAC play off that loss last week at W&J, host the Geneva Golden Tornadoes, who really fought hard last week in a 20-7 loss to Case Western Reserve. The Golden Tornadoes are 2-4, 1-3 in PAC play. And Geneva's won the last 6 of 8 matchups since the series restarted in 2007, with Bethany last winning in 2012, 42-36 in overtime on homecoming. And in 2014, it was a 20-14 Geneva win in Beaver Falls. It was really a tough pill to swallow for Bethany as it outgained Geneva by 151 yards, but the effort was derailed by 5 Brian Vales interceptions, 9 penalties for 80 yards, and falling short 0 for 4 in the red zone. Geneva had its struggles as well, 2 for 17 on third downs and had 3 turnovers, but capitalizing on 18 points off turnovers made the difference in this one, guys. Golden Tornadoes, Bison, 2 teams in the bottom tier of the PAC. Break it down for me.
Well, I mean, if it's anything like last season with Brian Vales throwing 5 interceptions, Lincoln Reyes is right on pace to possibly do that again. 4 interceptions this past game against Washington and Jefferson. And I'm sorry for Bethany, though. The score sheet is not indicative of really, truly how bad Bethany was beaten by the W&J starters. 66-42 was the final. The 52 points allowed at the half. W&J came out and scored on the opening possession in the third quarter. The starters were then down after that. 59-21 was the lead at that point. But Bethany kept its starters out on the field. Eventually put 21 points up on the W&J backups in the fourth quarter, making this score seem a lot closer than it really was at one point. I mean, as I already mentioned with Lincoln Reyes, he leads the PAC in interceptions with 16, leads the PAC in passing yards, however, with 1,619. But, I mean, Eric Blinn was the focal point of this team, him and Jalen Holmes this past week. Blinn with the 11 receptions for 146 yards, leading the PAC in receptions, receiving touchdowns, and receptions per game. He's second behind Goose Cohorn in receiving yards. But it's this Bethany defense that I've watched this season, and I see nothing like that top 75 defense in Division III last season. Bethany allowing 50-plus points for the third straight week this year, and then they hadn't allowed 50-plus points 3 times in a season since 2004 when it happened 5 times. That team finished 1-9, and over the past years since 2010, Bethany has only allowed 50 points 3 times. Mount Union last season, Geneva in 2013, and W&J in 2010. This is the difference of this Bethany squad, which we've been so used to seeing defense, with a comparable offense that was capable of putting enough points on the board to get them the win. But this Bethany team is unlike any sorts of what we've seen, but luckily going up against a Geneva team that's offense hasn't gotten going since Waynesburg.
Well, what's tough, Sean, and I'll go back to that game against W&J. W&J scoring 24 unanswered points in the second quarter to go up 52-21 at halftime. During that time, a short Bethany punt in its own end zone gave W&J the ball at the Bethany 37, and W&J scored. A blocked punt for W&J leads to a touchdown. Lincoln Reyes fumbles deep in Bethany territory to give W&J a short field for a score, and we've talked for the last really 2-3 seasons what you do whenever you give W&J short fields, and then an interception by Reyes leads to a field goal. I thought it was mistakes. I mean, really across the board. The Bethany defense really at the end of the day, you're going to say, how does Bethany's defense give up 66 points? But just so many mistakes really across the board. Special teams and offense that led to, the demise in this game.
And I have to say, I think we can all agree with Bethany. There are players on both sides of the football that are potentially all-conference caliber players that can compete for a championship if the right mesh comes together. And you look at Lincoln Reyes, third in terms of passing yards per game, 231 yards a game, second in passing touchdowns with 15. But when you throw 16 interceptions at this point in the season and the next qualifying quarterback has 7 interceptions and you have 3 games with at least 4 interceptions, every game you throw 4 interceptions, you can just throw right out the window. That's going to be a loss here in the PAC. And this team, tied with Grove City, a negative 13 turnover margin, 20 giveaways, that's tied for most in the PAC, and only 7 takeaways. With that defense, the personnel that they have, that's the second fewest in the PAC. Now, I do want to touch on Geneva. Geneva put together what I would say, especially defensively, was a very respectable performance. Rob Cuda is the leader in the clubhouse in terms of, hey, who's going to be the PAC Offensive Player of the Year? You could make a very strong argument for him. 13 for 30 for 163, 2 touchdowns, was sacked 6 times, ran the ball 18 times for just 15 net yards. That is far and away the best outing any PAC defense has had against Case Western. They're the first PAC team to hold Case under 41 points in a single game, under 300 yards of total offense, when Case averages about 450. That's a very strong performance. If you're Geneva, I'm very happy with that defensively. But you turn the tables offensively, they're last in PAC in terms of total offense, 276 a game. Only 124 in this game, 24 carries for 28 yards. That's fewer than 1 yard per carry. And Aaron Channing, 11 for 21, 76 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. But who do you turn to if you're Geneva? I mean, Colton Boer's back, Nick Cook, Devin Kolaski. They don't really instill fear in the defenses. And you look at Eric Blinn on the other side, at least they know they have him. That's who we can go to. That's a guy who can get us some yards. I'm not sure if Geneva has that guy. Geneva has some playmakers, especially defensively. Jimmy Quinlan, 18 tackles last week, 5 tackles per loss a week ago. Second in the PAC in tackles, first in tackles per loss.
What a performance.
Absolutely. Against one of the best offenses in the PAC. It's a shame that they weren't able to get more out of their own offense. But I like this matchup considering playmakers. I don't think anyone's going to argue with Jalen Holmes being a top 5 back. He's 5th in rushing. Eric Blinn, you mentioned the numbers with him, where he ranks in the PAC, Sean. It's just what team is going to put it all together, or what team is going to make fewer you referenced mistakes, Carson. And last season's meeting was a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and I mean, to go back about how young and inexperienced this Geneva offense is, it's just really a lot like Grove City in the fact that there are pieces, just not a cohesive unit. And the few times that we have seen this Geneva offense produce well, it's when Dylan Jones is getting the carries, enabling Geneva to be balanced. Since the Waynesburg game, when he was extremely effective, still had 69 yards and a touchdown against Carnegie Mellon, but then 3 carries for 8 yards against Thomas More, and then 5 carries for 14 yards against Case Western Reserve. Now, we've seen an increase in carries by Javid Ellis, Eric Lucic, so maybe it's becoming more of a running back by committee approach, but this offense is at its best, as I said, when there's a balanced attack using run and pass with Aaron Channing and take chances when presented to Nick Cook, Devin Kolaski. I mean, this defense put up one of the performances of the year of any defense in the PAC against Case Western, a high-power offense. But, I mean, when you're averaging under 200 yards, 2 for 17 on third down.
When you have more drives that go backwards than go over 20 yards.
Yeah, 76 passing yards on 11 for 21 attempts and an interception, and just 56 yards generated by the running backs. Not a good day by Aaron Channing, not a good day by the running backs in this one. But at the same time, just Bethany has so many different struggles. I mean, averaging over 400 yards of offense a game, but just the mistakes.
Yeah,
whether
they outgained W&J.
It's just
they outrushed W&J. They were 4 for 4 in the red zone, 8 for 15 on third down, and it still didn't matter. It's a shame.
Yeah, I don't. And on the other hand, with me, I don't take those numbers into account because Bethany did keep its starters in the entire game,
is a good point.
and W&J had its second and third team guys out on the field in the the fourth quarter. So I see where Bethany, you can find the positives out of this, but it's hard for me to take those positives when it's a first team playing against sophomores and some freshmen here and there, or some juniors that don't see the field.
And you have all the turnovers and mistakes.
And when Eric Blynn's being covered by the backup cornerback, the number 3 guy on the depth chart, he's going to have those big games.
All right, let's move on, guys. A tough matchup in our next one, a 1:30 kickoff in Grove City, PA, as the number 11 team in the country, the Thomas More Saints, undefeated at 7-0, 5-0 in PAC play, travel to Grove City to take on the Wolverines, 0-6 overall, 0-4 in PAC play. And Thomas More owns the edge in this one in the 10-game series, 9 wins to just 1 loss, coming in 2007 when Grove City pulled off the win in Kentucky 23-16. And last year it was a 64-7 Thomas More win at home. It was all Saints in this contest as Thomas More jumped out to a 41-0 lead at halftime and then scored 3 more touchdowns in the second half. Dominic Hayden rushed for 174 yards and 5 scores on the day, while Jensen Gabhart averaged nearly 20 yards per completion, and the defense forced 3 interceptions thrown by 3 different Wolverines quarterbacks. Guys, Saints, Wolverines, winless team versus an undefeated team. What do you have in this matchup?
Well, some more fun notes from last year's game. Thomas More outgained Grove City by over 400 yards, and Dominique Hayden and C.T. Tarrant combined for 7 touchdowns on the ground. Grove City had 4 quarterbacks attempt passes. 3 of them succeeded in throwing interceptions. But that was Grove City last season. Grove City this season, well, I'm not saying they have a chance in this game, but they're certainly more compelling as a football team. They've been in a number of football games: Juniata, Geneva, Waynesburg. If it's not for 3 return touchdowns against St. Vincent, I think they're in that game. The schedule hasn't given them a break. CMU, W&J, and now Thomas More. These are 3 of the top half teams in the PAC, and they don't do a lot of things well. But life gets easier when you don't turn the football over, and that gets this team into binds. 20 giveaways over 6 games. That's over 3 turnovers per game, most in the PAC. A minus 13 turnover margin. That ties them for the worst turnover margin in the conference. But fret not, Wolverines. Bethany and Thiel are still on the schedule. And Antonio Caroche's back. And I certainly take that as a positive. Now, he didn't play well against CMU. 10 for 28, 159, no touchdowns, and an interception. And Matt Pennypacker came in and threw another 2 interceptions, just for good measure. But I think Caroche does have what it takes to be a successful quarterback at this level. We saw it through the first few games. But what concerns me with Grove City is protecting the quarterback and getting a passable running game with that offensive line. Life gets so much easier, and this isn't specific to Grove City, but in general across the board, when you can run the football and get into down and distance situations that you can really manage as an offense and do a couple of different things, that'll make things easier for Caroche. And you look at that third down mark, 31% of the time they convert. That's 10th in the PAC, dead last situationally in the red zone, 57%, and they've allowed the most sacks in the conference. You couple that. How is this connected? Well, they're last in rushing, under 75 yards a game, under 2 yards a carry, one of 2 offenses that averages under 300 yards of total offense per game, one of 2 teams that averages under 17 points per game. Now, they've been hurt. Lots of mistakes for Grove City. And you mentioned this earlier, Carson, with mistakes hurting some of these teams. I don't think they're as bad as their record says they are. They certainly aren't as bad as they were last year, but going up against Thomas More.
Well, here's where I'll break it down, and this is where I was really discouraged last week in the 44-0 result to Carnegie Mellon. Thomas More averages 20 more points a game than CMU does. So on paper, this just looks like a really tough matchup for Grove City, given that it's now 16 consecutive losses. But the discouraging sign for me, the Wolverine defense, been traditionally the backbone of this team, but allowed 7 scoring drives of 7 plays or more, including a 15 and 11 play drive, with those drives spanning 57 yards or more. So it wasn't like Bethany giving opposing offenses short fields to work with in W&J. CMU earned all of the points it scored in last week's contest. But, the offense struggled to sustain drives, either as only one first-half drive spanned more than 30 yards for Grove City. I'm curious to see whether head coach Regis Scaife gives another start to backup quarterback Brennan Kuntz or stick with Jensen Gebhardt, as both had interceptions a week ago, and Kuntz is coming off a 30-point win in his start 2 weeks ago versus Geneva. But who's ever behind center, just, I think, hand the ball off to C.T. Tarrant. He's averaging 169 yards and 2 scores on the ground in his last 3 games and really emerged as the lead back instead of committee approach with Javier Pitts. I don't know if there's a member in the Grove City secondary to match up mano a mano with Goose Cohorn, and he's a touchdown waiting to happen every time he touches the ball, averaging a score per game and 19 yards a catch. Now, the defense is still just allowing a league-low 14 points and 295 yards per game and forces more turnovers than all but Westminster in this conference. Again, on paper, very few positive signs for Grove City to win this game, but stranger thing than happen. I hope that we see a bounce back by this defense.
Well, my thing, if you're Thomas More, after 2 weeks ago when Brennan Kuntz got the start against Geneva, they went into that game with, I guess, knowing they were going to win this game. However, I think if you're Thomas More now, after what Jensen Gebhardt did this past week against St. Vincent, you cannot rest him despite playing Grove City, Waynesburg. You have Case Western coming up on the schedule too. I think you have to roll with Jensen Gebhardt. Let him continue to keep playing and doing his thing. Had his lowest completion percentage of the season against St. Vincent at 48.3%, going 14 of 19 passing, threw 2 interceptions. Had his second lowest yard outcome of the season. His lowest was against W&J. You know what you're getting out of C.T. Tarrant. You know what you're getting out of Goose Cohorn. You know what you're getting out of Tyler Vogelpohl. But for Thomas More to win games, I think, in the playoffs and beyond, you need Jensen Gebhardt to be your starting quarterback, not Brennan Kuntz. So I think after what Gebhardt did last week, after that week off against Geneva, I think Gebhardt needs to continue no matter what, being your starting quarterback from here on out. This defense, led by Trey Wells, the PAC Defensive Player of the Year, Player of the Week, not Player of the Year, with 2 interceptions. He played very well. Eric Butler with 8 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. But for Grove City, they need to get some production out of former Kent State player Antonio Carosha to get some offense going against a stout Thomas More team altogether.
Great stuff, guys. Great breakdown of that matchup. Let's move on to the biggest matchup of the week, the number 15 team in the country, the Washington Jefferson Presidents, 5-1 overall, 3-1 in PAC play at the red-hot Case Western Reserve Spartans, who are 5-1 overall, 5-0 in PAC play. A 6 o'clock night game kickoff in Cleveland, Ohio. And this is a back-and-forth rivalry between these two teams, with W&J leading 18-16-1 over Case Western Reserve in the all-time series. And in 2014, it was a 34-24 W&J win at home. In last year's contest, the Presidents weren't able to truly pull away in this contest until the last 2 minutes in regulation, when Ryan Ruffing scored on a 10-play drive that used up more than 5 minutes of clock, as the Presidents led 34-16 before ultimately winning 34-24. Pete Coughlin had over 300 yards through the air, Ryan Ruffing had a 100-yard game, and Jesse Zubik had a day, 11 catches for 130 yards in this contest. Spartans, Presidents, guys, Case Western Reserve wins. It sets up for a huge matchup in 2 weeks against Thomas More, hosted in Cleveland, Ohio. But if W&J can win this game, another high-caliber resume win that can go toward them being a second team if Thomas More ends up winning the PAC to get into the national playoffs. What do we see in this one?
Well, looking at this one, this is a tale of 2 completely different defenses. You have the Case Western defense, 9th in all of Division III, allowing just 71.5 yards on the ground, 19th in total defense in Division III, and then you have W&J, whose run defense hasn't been what it's been in the past, but the pass defense is top 20 in Division III. Coming off that big win against Bethany, where Pete Coughlin in the last 2 weeks has only thrown 7 incomplete passes, had just 4 incompletions this week, going 15 of 19 for 202 yards and 3 touchdowns. Added that rush touchdown in the third quarter. And then player of the week on the offensive side in the PAC, Ryan Ruffing, had 170 all-purpose yards on 19 touches, 17 carries for 116 and 3 touchdowns, and then 2 receptions for 54 yards. I think the difference between what W&J has and what Case Western has on the offensive side of the ball is Rob Cuda can not only throw the ball, but he can run the ball. Pete Coughlin can throw the ball, and he can run the ball. But W&J, I think, has a more established running back that Case Western has seen all season. But W&J also has numerous threats on the outside, whether it's Dan Liss, whether it's Jesse Zubik, whether it's Eric Scott, who's made a comeback this season, whether it's Asa Kostelnock. The list goes on for the W&J targets that Pete Coughlin has. And when you look at the targets for Rob Cuda, you have your targets of Brandon Lynch, who last week just 3 receptions for 20 yards. Brian Erb didn't do much last week. Ethan Albers wasn't even on the stat sheet, but it was Zach Medved this week with 4 receptions this past week with 4 receptions for 86 yards. So it's a matter of who will Rob Cuda find in the secondary of W&J that's going to be open against the top 20 pass defense, and will Case Western continue to roll defensively on the ground against the best back they have seen this season?
Case Western, this is your chance. This is it. You beat St. Vincent, you beat Thiel, Bethany, Waynesburg, Geneva. It's time to put up or shut up. If you want to be an elite team, you have to beat elite teams. You led Chicago by 14 in the fourth quarter. Westminster isn't on your schedule. It's time for Thomas More and W&J. They've been the cream of the crop in the PAC, and to become the cream of the crop, you have to beat them. That's the way it is. Talking to Coach Shepis after the Waynesburg Case Western game, he said Rob Cuda was just about as good as it gets, could certainly be an all-conference player. If Sam Banger doesn't lead the nation in rushing, it's very likely Rob Cuda is your offensive player of the year. What really impresses me more than anything, it's not the passing yards per game second in the conference. It's not the 18 touchdowns first in the conference. It's the 0 interceptions. He hasn't turned the football over. And by the way, he's 8th in rushing, 77 yards a game, over 6 yards a carry. This team has turned so many weaknesses from a season ago into strengths. They boast the best turnover margin in the PAC, 12 takeaways, 4 giveaways. Those 4 giveaways, the fewest in the PAC. They had 12 takeaways all of last season for a -13 margin that was the worst in the conference. But, Sean, to your point about this W&J team being the first real test since week 1, Case sort of crumbled under the pressure in the fourth quarter. With that 2-touchdown lead, they gave up drives of 68, 68, and 69 yards for touchdowns, and they couldn't do anything. Case had the lone turnover in that game, and even though they outplayed Chicago in a number of capacities, but this will be the first week where they play a quarterback, a running back, a receiving core of all of those calibers. Combine that with the pace of play that W&J has. This is a beast that this Case Western defense will have to come up against and do what they do. Because for W&J, this is a must-win for the Presidents, too. That they lost to another ranked team on the road. D3 football is very forgiving. W&J is still the number 15 team in the country. I'm not sure if the voters will be as understanding if they lose to an unranked team in Case Western.
I don't think so either, considering that Case Western has yet to even receive an others receiving vote in the D3 poll. But, Carson, before you go on, real quick, there are 2 things that I want to hit on that I think this game will come down to. And one, it's the battle on 4th down. W&J likes to go for it on 4th and shorts. 9 of 16 this year on 4th down. But Case Western is tied for 16th in Division III football with Thomas More only allowing the opposition to go 3 of 14 on 4th down. So we'll have to see how that battle of 4th down plays out. But also, Case Western has a kicker in Ben Carneal, the reigning PAC Special Teams Player of the Week, who can kick extra points very well and can kick field goals. And that is the one thing W&J has struggled with this season is field goal opportunities. They got one last week from Ted Ford, but can W&J capitalize on those and not get a blocked field goal or a blocked extra point? Because we've seen that harm them in the past is those blocks onto the special team part.
Couple points. I do think Case Western Reserve wins this game. I think it will get into the top 25. I think a ranked opponent, they're going to see 6-0 in conference play. I think we could see them jump in. Another point, I liked what you had to say, Sean. It's a different type of rushing attack for Case Western Reserve. Anthony Canganelli, a sophomore, averaging 38 yards per game, who's also scored 5 touchdowns on the season. A lot like Kimu Kim from Westminster, a power back who Case likes to beat between the tackles. Not necessarily, though, a C.T. Tarrant, a Ryan Ruffing, a Don McKinley, Jalen Holmes, Jerry Lawmen. It's Cuda who does the running out of the backfield. Now, I think, though, Pete Coughlin didn't play the best game of his performance, arguably the worst in a big game earlier this season. 4 interceptions versus Thomas More, and what is a very comparable defense. And if Ruffing has trouble finding running room, he's going to have, I think that Coughlin's going to have to put the team on his shoulders with the great receiving core that, Sean, you mentioned. But I think, likewise, this is the most important game for Rob Cuda in his young career. Head coach Greg Debelak and the program since joining the PAC, as a win against W&J, I think sets it up a potential PAC championship game 2 weeks from now against Thomas More. It's been the President's Conference for the last 3 years now, but can Case take that next step forward? And they've already gone this season to go from just being good to great. But guys, we got to move on. I know we could break that matchup down for another 20 minutes if we really had to.
It'll be a fun one to watch.
But our featured matchup this week features the Waynesburg University Yellow Jackets, 2-5 overall, 1-4 in PAC play against the Thiel Tomcats, 1-5 overall, 0-4 in PAC play, a 1:30 kickoff in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania. Waynesburg currently owns the lead in the all-time series, 28-8-1, and the Jackets are currently riding a 9-game winning streak, and head coach Rick Shepis, who we thank for being on as this week's PAC Football Focus, is 9-1 all-time versus Thiel, with the only loss coming in 2005, his first season, and Thiel's PAC championship season. And last year, a great game, 35-32, Waynesburg won at Thiel. It came down to the wire as Thiel scored 3 fourth-quarter touchdowns, but Jake Forsythe and the Waynesburg offense had the final say, scoring a game-winning touchdown run with just a minute and 15 remaining in regulation. A huge day from quarterback Ryan Radke, 317 yards passing, 81 yards rushing, and 3 total touchdowns in the game. Same with wide receiver Marcus Johnson, who's no longer with the team, 10 catches, 210 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Guys, Jackets, Tomcats, not the most intriguing matchup of the week in the President's Athletic Conference, but 2 teams who are clawing, fighting, scratching for a win in the PAC. What do we see here?
You mentioned the point that I wanted to go to. Who are we going to see at quarterback for the Thiel Tomcats this week? Are we going to see the return of Ryan Radke after a week at wide receiver 2 weeks ago at the quarterback spot? And you mentioned the numbers last year against Waynesburg, Carson. 317, 2 touchdowns, the 1 pick, and then 81 yards on 13 carries, adding a 3rd touchdown on the ground. Or will it be Jarrett Pound, who went 12 of 23 for 144 yards and 3 interceptions against Westminster? If I'm Thiel, I look at the stats of what Radke put up against Waynesburg last year, but not just last year. 2 years ago when he came in.
Oh, I got those numbers for you.
Do you have those numbers?
I got those numbers for you. Thiel was down in this contest. It was October 5th, 2013. Thiel's trailing 28-0 going into the 4th quarter. Radke comes in for an injured Andrew Smith. 1 quarter, 11 for 19 for 91 yards, 11 carries for 123 yards and a touchdown to make it a more respectable 31-21 loss. So Radke's done it twice now against the Jags.
Yeah, so will we see the return of Ryan Radke at quarterback? Because like Aaron Channing, Radke has been a Waynesburg killer. He just hasn't put up a victory against Waynesburg like Channing did this season. However, flip the script to the Waynesburg quarterback question right now with Jake Doherty. His progression was boosting through the first few weeks of the season, hit its peak against Geneva, where he didn't throw an interception, 3 touchdowns, over 200 yards. But since then, it's been a decline a little bit for Jake Doherty every week. a slight boost in the first half last week, going 11 of 13 for 99 yards with a touchdown, but an interception that really gave momentum to Westminster late in the first half. In the second quarter, Westminster would drive 96 yards down the field to put up the tying touchdown going into the half. But then in the second half, after that interception, Jake Doherty, 5 for 16 for just 45 yards, and 29 of those yards came on a Willie Lavelle pass that was about 10 yards up the field, and he took it another 19 and found some space. And for Waynesburg, they have to make sure their receivers can get open, unlike last week where they got locked down. Tim Cooper had 4 receptions for 59 yards in the first half. Didn't touch the ball in the second half. Kevin Barnes had 20 yards receiving. We haven't seen that out of Kevin Barnes all season. And for this Waynesburg defense, really looked at its best last week in the first half, only allowing the 7 points. But in the second half, they weren't able to contain Demetrius Bentley, who had 5 catches for 100 yards, 70-plus yards on the ground with a touchdown there. This Waynesburg defense has to continue to play well. And Thiel, it's the quarterback question that gets me the most.
Bottom line, coming out of this last week, if you're Waynesburg, this is one that got away that I think, and I think Coach Shepis thinks, that the team certainly had a chance to win a game at home against a backup quarterback in Shamon Walker. You outplay the Titans in the first quarter. You're driving down in the second quarter, and then all of a sudden, an illegal formation penalty on a touchdown, a 4th and inches play gone wrong, and all of a sudden you're in a game. And yes, Demetrius Bentley, 9 touches offensively, 172 yards, the back-breaking 53-yard touchdown. And this is just a team that's not making winning football plays, playing with confidence, and I do not think that this Waynesburg team, as it's composed, is going to run away from anybody, let alone Thiel. And we haven't seen Thiel play in a close game or have to deal with any adversity, but Waynesburg hasn't been in any blowout situation since week 1, where it's on the side of winning in the blowout situation. And especially considering Waynesburg, its most successful quarter is the first quarter, where they're outscoring opponents, scoring consistently over a touchdown, almost 10 points per first quarter. And then in the second quarter, the Yellow Jackets, for whatever reason, the offense just, the foot comes off the gas. The team has 1 third down conversion all year in the second quarter. And you look at some of the leads that teams are opening up against Thiel. These games aren't games in the second halves. And really, if you're opening the door for Thiel, especially if Ryan Radke will play quarterback, you both mentioned that point, I don't want to take my chances, especially considering how effective. There was only one team a season ago who finished over 50% on third down against this defense of Waynesburg last year, and that was Thiel, because of Radke's play. You mentioned Kevin Barnes, Sean. I certainly expect him to be better. Last week, 4 catches, 22 yards. That's the first week he's been under 70 yards in any single week this entire season. He's a top 5 guy in just about every receiving capacity. I expect a bounce back from him, but this game, these teams are evenly matched in the fact that one isn't really going to overpower the other. A big stat for Thiel, they've given up 26 scoring drives of 90 seconds or less. They're one of the top teams in terms of time of possession, but they give up the big play. But for Waynesburg, I don't know who's going to make that big play.
Yeah, we're running out of time, so I'll just break it down real quickly. Sean, I totally agree with you. I think that one of the big determining factors, do we see Ryan Radke start at quarterback or come in and play significant stretches, or is it Jared Pound, who started off his last game throwing a pick 6 on the first series, didn't sustain drives, and let you allow to points, and then threw another interception to fall behind 21-0 in the first quarter, then more unsustained drives and another pick in the second quarter, and it's 42-0 at halftime against Westminster. Just nothing positive from that game for Jared Pound. And I think Waynesburg still proved last week that it has some fight in them left. It's senior day at John F. Wiley Stadium. I think we haven't seen Waynesburg put together a full 4 quarters of play yet this season. And I think Thiel coming off a bye, fresh and rested, I think this could be Thiel at its best physical standpoint coming off the season. I think this matches up well with Waynesburg because Thiel hasn't had a back go over 100 yards since week 1 against Allegheny. But on the flip side, can Waynesburg offensive line be stout like it was last week against Westminster with Riley Shane across them, one of the best in the conference on the other side, who's recorded 9.5 tackles for loss this season? Going to be an interesting one. A 1:30 kickoff in Waynesburg, Pennsylvania. Well, guys, I greatly appreciate it. Great analysis, as always. We'll be back next week for Week 9 action around the President's Athletic Conference. Tune into that big one in Cleveland, Ohio. We'll break it down all next week and get into some of the other big matchups. Next week on the PAC Football Focus, we'll be talking to Westminster head coach Scott Benzel. And then we'll bring you back for another pregame show here in the ending final couple weeks in the PAC. You've been listening to the pregame show here on PACathletics.org.